he just has to put an end to this war sooner rather than later. And the reason for that is that he has no military strategy that he can turn to that can allow him to win the war. There's just no military option here. As we've talked about before, if you go up the escalation ladder, it's the Iranians who prevail, not the Americans. So there's just no military option. Furthermore, the world economy is teetering. And the longer this goes on, the more damage that's going to be done to the world economy. And by the way, if you do go up the escalation ladder, that'll really be another hammer blow to the world economy. And this has political consequences inside the United States for President Trump, not to mention the fact that it has huge economic and social consequences for countries all over the world. So he's under tremendous pressure to come up with some sort of agreement with Iran that allows us to walk away from this. The problem that he faces is that he's incompetent. The administration is incompetent when it comes to diplomacy. And the best example of this is a subject you and I have talked about ad nauseum, which is the Ukraine-Russia war. You want to remember that President Trump promised when he came into office that he was going to settle that war. And in fact, he said that he might even settle it before he moves into the White House. And he's made a complete hash of those diplomatic negotiations with the Russians. It's really quite remarkable, as you have recorded in a whole slew of different interviews with a variety of people over the past year or so. It's really quite amazing. So why would anyone expect him to be any more adept in negotiating with the Iranians than he has been in negotiating with the Ukrainians and the Russians? He's just not a good diplomat by any stretch of the imagination. And to add to the trouble, he's got to deal with Israel and the Israel lobby. And this is a very important issue, Glenn. The fact is that the Israelis understand that up to this point in time, we've lost the war. We meaning the United States and Israel. We had a set of goals going into the war, four main goals, as you know: regime change, getting rid of Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, getting rid of their long-range missiles, and getting them to stop supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. We failed on all counts. And on top of that, as everybody knows, the Iranians, who did not control the Strait of Hormuz before February 28th and did not have a toll booth located in the middle of it, now control the Strait of Hormuz and have a toll booth located right there. So the Iranians have won. From an Israeli point of view, this is a disastrous situation because the Israelis view Iran as an existential threat. You and I can disagree with the Israelis, but that doesn't matter. They think it's an existential threat. And of course, the lobby here in the United States goes along with Israel no matter what. So the end result is that Israel wants to continue the war. It's just very important to understand that. They want us to continue hammering away at Iran to try to beat them into submission. And if we don't beat them into submission, well, we'll just destroy them. Do what we did in Gaza to Iran. That's the Israeli view, and that's the Israel lobby's view. So if you think about the situation in Ukraine, going back there, and then you think about the situation with regard to Iran, you see inept diplomacy on the part of the Trump administration in both cases. But in the case of Iran, the situation's even worse because you've got Israel and the lobby leaning on him not to come up with a peace agreement that reflects what's happening in the war, which is another way of saying, which reflects the fact that Iran has won. So Trump is veering back and forth between two positions. One, which is pushed forward by the economic realities and the realities of what has happened in the actual fighting to work out some sort of deal. He has powerful incentives because of the state of the world economy and because of what's happened in the fighting to cut a deal. He understands he has no military option. He understands we've effectively lost, and he understands the damage that could be done to the world economy. That tells him, let's cut a deal. But on the other side, he has the Israelis and he has their minions here in the United States. And they are powerful and they're honeycombed throughout the entire administration to put enormous pressure on him not to cut a deal and instead to play hardball with the Iranians. So what you see him doing is wavering back and forth between these two positions. And in the end, we have been unable to get a ceasefire, much less meaningful negotiations started. You want to understand, we don't even have a ceasefire yet because a ceasefire involved shutting down the fighting in Lebanon between the Israelis and Hezbollah, which has kind of been done. And number two, opening the strait. And the strait opened for one day. And then because President Trump wouldn't take off the American blockade of the strait, the Iranians put the blockade back on. So we haven't even fulfilled all the conditions that were required for a ceasefire, much less began to move seriously towards an agreement. And all the time this is happening, the clock is ticking on the world economy. And this is a very dangerous situation.
Is it possible, though, with the ceasefire that this could be a way for the United States to get Iran to fight the war on America's terms? Because this appears to be one of the things that has failed since the beginning. That is, when the US attacked, it looked as if Trump would have favored to do a little bit of bombing and then stop. And the Iranians essentially didn't want to give him this kind of escalation control. And they made it clear that any attack would get a massive response. So, so shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, attacking the Gulf allies, essentially denying the US this kind of escalation control. Now, in the ceasefire, seems to follow the same logic. Yes, initially, the US appeared to agree to this 10-point plan, at least as a point of departure to start discussions. But then it seems to be this incrementalism. Well, the US should be allowed to put a blockade on Iran. Israel should be allowed to bomb a little bit in Lebanon. US should be able to seize or fire on some Iranian ships, and to keep it, I guess, low intensity. I mean, is it possible that it's just to get the war under control, or is it the ceasefire gone wrong? Because I think Iran will probably interpret this as a wider effort. Well, whatever minor escalation there's now, the overarching objective would be the effort to destroy their nation or wipe out their civilization, to use Trump's language. So do you think this has anything to do with how the war is fought, or just to bring it down, the intensity of it, and limit the targets that Iran are targeting?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And let me give you my 2 cents on it. I think that what Trump wants to do here is he wants to use military leverage to get the Iranians to agree to a ceasefire and then to come to the negotiating table. And he wants to use that military leverage to get a good deal, not a great deal. He's not going to get a great deal. He wants, I think, to get something that's better than the JCPOA when it comes to the nuclear enrichment issue. But he needs, he thinks, military leverage to do that. So let's talk about military leverage. My view is that any country has, any great power, I should say, has three levers that it can use, three military instruments that it can use to get what it wants, either through coercive purposes or by fighting the actual war. And one is air power, two is ground power or land power, and three is naval power. Those are the sort of three instruments that a state has. And we started the war on February 28th and waged it before the ceasefire, largely with air power. We struck Iran from the air, and We struck them with naval aircraft, but we didn't have a blockade on at that point in time. It was all about air power. And that air power campaign, Glenn, failed. And that's why you moved to a ceasefire. And that's why we can say today that up to this point, Iran has won the war. The air power campaign failed. And by the way, everybody knew, or let me put it differently, everybody should have known beforehand that air power alone was not going to defeat Iran. The historical record is clear here. So that's air power. Then there's ground power. And here we're talking about using ground forces for the purpose of invading Iran. This is not a serious option. First of all, we don't have many combat troops at all in the region. There's talk about 50,000 American troops in the region. Only a small slice of them are combat troops. And the idea that even if all of them were combat troops, you could invade Iran and do something to end this war is not a serious argument. We don't have the combat forces there to launch a ground invasion. Furthermore, President Trump is allergic to boots on the ground. Furthermore, the American people are not willing to tolerate the kind of pain that would be required if you're going to launch a full-scale invasion of Iran. Just think about how deeply concerned we were about the life of that pilot who was shot down, right? The idea that he might be killed was a horrible thought. Our tolerance for pain over the Iran war is not very high. The idea that you're going to launch a massive ground offensive into Iran, suffer lots of casualties, have soldiers coming back in body bags, that's just not possible. It's just not going to happen. And it seems to me that President Trump, although he occasionally hints at maybe a tiny ground force incursion, the ground force option is just not a serious option. So what I'm telling you is up to now, the air power option was tried and failed. We have no serious ground power option or land force option. And unsurprisingly, what have we turned to? We've turned to the naval option. And we have a blockade on the strait. And furthermore, we're running around the world hunting down ships carrying Iranian oil way out in East Asia or Southwest Asia. And the question you have to ask yourself is whether or not you think this blockade is going to bring the Iranians to their knees. And I would say to you, first of all, Glenn, if the blockade is such a war-winning weapon or is an effective war-winning weapon, why didn't we turn to it earlier? Why are we only turning to it now? And the answer is it's not a war-winning weapon. First of all, I don't think the U.S. Navy can sustain a blockade for a long period of time. We have a limited number of ships. The wear and tear on our ships is enormous. I think a lot of ships, based on what I read, are getting through the blockade. We run the risk at some point that the Chinese will escort ships into the Strait of Hormuz, which will put us in a very difficult position because then we'll have to face the fact that we might have to attack Chinese ships if we want to prevent those Iranian cargo ships or oil tankers from going into the Gulf. I mean, there's all sorts of trouble that one can imagine with this blockade. And I think very importantly, what you saw today is that the Iranians have captured two ships in the Persian Gulf. They've seized two ships in retaliation for the two ships that we have seized. So they're playing tit for tat. Moreover, the Iranians have made it manifestly clear that if you want to come back to the bargaining table, you have to put an end to the blockade. So at some point, Trump is going to have to end the blockade just to go back to the bargaining table. He can't dilly-dally forever and ever. We have to get negotiations going here. And that means he's going to have to take the blockade off at some point. But my previous point is the blockade's not going to be that effective. Is it going to inflict some pain on the Iranians? Yeah. But the Iranians have demonstrated that they have a high tolerance for pain, a much higher tolerance for pain than we do. So the naval option is not a war winning option. We have no war winning option. Uh, President Trump talks about sort of going back to air power. And a lot of people say we're going to go in and bomb this and bomb that. That's not going to work either. If it was going to work, he would have done it. We tried bombing. It didn't work. What's the new formula that's going to allow us to succeed? Oh, we're going to go in and destroy all of their energy infrastructure and basically make Iran unlivable. That's not going to work. Everybody knows that because the Iranians can retaliate. So we're out of options. And what he has to do here is he has to get a ceasefire in place ASAP, and then they have to start negotiating. And he has to come up with a clever set of proposals that he can work on with the Iranians so that we can work out some sort of deal and shut this down as much as possible and rescue the international economy before it goes off a cliff.
Well, this tit for tat, so this has been one of the interesting ways this war has developed. That is, whatever the US does, it appears that the Iranians can mirror it and go up that escalation ladder with the Americans. But that's why I'm wondering if this is what the US will do. What do you expect on the Iranian side? Because there doesn't seem to be a diplomatic path here. At least it seems to be too far apart at the moment. The US, again, it might do this heavy air campaign, and then complemented with the sea blockade. Some people like Keith Kellogg are, arguing for a land campaign as well, that is to seize islands and these kind of things. But what do you see Iran possibly doing? I know the IRGC has suggested that they could do things like cut undersea internet cables, or they could shut down the Red Sea. Indeed, Yemen has more or less has said that they're prepared to enter the war now. But what is the secret weapon you think of Iran if the US, let's say US pursues this strategy of just bombing Iran, inflicting as much pain as possible, and then either in perpetuity or just until they decide to leave? What do you expect to see from the Iranians?
Well, if you're describing a situation where the United States goes back to a massive bombing campaign where they're attacking energy infrastructure, bridges, and doing enormous amounts of damage inside Iran, including killing many, many thousands of civilians, I think what Iran will do is that it will shut down the Persian Gulf completely. It will shut down the Red Sea, and it will attack energy infrastructure and desalination plants all across the Gulf. It will do everything it can to wreck the Gulf. It's what I call the Goddard-Dameron response. We're going to bring everybody down with us, right? The idea that you're just going to inflict punishment on Iran and get away with it, and everybody else is going to be able to stand idly by while our country is destroyed, is not in the cards. We are going to take others down with us. We will take every state in the Gulf down with us, and we will wreck the world economy. And we will do that by shutting down the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. And this will have disastrous consequences over the long term. And surely everybody understands that. That would be the threat that I would make if I were playing their hand. And I believe it is a very formidable threat. And I believe the people in the Trump administration and people all around the world understand this is what is likely to happen if the United States turns the dogs loose and really goes after Iran's infrastructure and its population in a major way. And that's why I think it's not going to happen. This is why I say if you go up the escalation ladder, The Iranians hold all the cards. You can do enormous damage to Iran, but the fact is they can do even greater damage to the world economy and to states in the region.
But I was wondering though, sometimes you get some commentary that that well, yes, that this could melt down the global economy. But do you think there's anyone that there would be some in the administration who would think, so what? Because the U.S. is independent on the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. doesn't have to be reliant on energy from the Middle East. Is it some, I guess, based on the history of World War II, that the whole world burned down, but the U.S. remained, and now it was the last one standing? Do you think there's anyone who would, maybe not welcome such a scenario, but who would be willing essentially to sacrifice the Gulf states if it meant weakening or destroying Iran and weakening, for example, China significantly? Or do you think that's over the top?
No, I think that Israel and its supporters will be inclined to adopt the position you just described. Uh, Again, it's very important to understand that from Israel's point of view, Iran is an existential threat. And they thought that when we went to war against Iran on February 28th, that the end result would be that Iran would suffer a staggering defeat. We would win, we meaning the United States and Israel. And the exact opposite is happening. And what we're talking about here, Glenn, is working out some sort of agreement that reflects the fact that Iran won. We may get certain concessions from the Iranians, but they won the war and they'll do very well in these negotiations. That's just the way it works. The winners on the battlefield are the winners at the negotiating table. Common sense tells you that. But the Israelis definitely don't want that. So they're going to push very hard for us to start the war up again. And the Israelis and their supporters in the United States will be inclined, not all will buy this argument, but they'll be inclined to make the argument that we can withstand the response that Iran comes up with after we turn the dogs loose. And I think that at that point, I think President Trump will side with common sense, and he will go to great lengths to tell the Israelis that they just have to accept the fact that we lost and that we're going to work out a deal with Iran. Because President Trump has a deep-seated interest in avoiding an economic catastrophe. I mean, there are all sorts of people who are students of international economics who say that, if this one spins out of control militarily and economically, that you could end up in a situation analogous to what you had in the 1930s. You could have a Great Depression. And there's some people who argue, and these are not foolish people, these are smart people, who argue you could have an economic depression worse than you had in the 1930s. Is that for sure? Of course not, because we don't know exactly where this train is headed. We live in an uncertain world, and how it all plays out is very hard to say. But it just seems pretty commonsensical that if you shut down the Gulf completely, you shut down the Red Sea, and you wreck all of those GCC countries, that the economic consequences worldwide are just enormous. It's not only gas and oil, it's the fertilizers that come out of the region, out of the Middle East, out of the Gulf, out of the Red Sea. It's the aluminum, it's the helium. It's just hard to imagine us doing anything to create a situation like that. And it would just seem to me that we will go to great lengths to avoid that. But again, I think there'll be pressure from Israel and from its supporters in the United States to really go after Iran and to not reach any agreement that gives them concessions, major concessions.
Well, I think one of the reasons why we got locked into these wars and not able to pull out, even now that the war has been lost, is or even predict the consequences that will come. You mentioned the global depression. We have the possibility of a famine. Is because in human nature, there's always the assumption that the present era is permanent. It's only been 35 years since the Soviet Union collapsed. It's the current era. It's the conditions of it. It hasn't been here for very long, and the assumption that it would stay like this forever is quite extraordinary. So you often get the impression that politicians aren't ready to make the necessary adjustments because they don't appreciate or recognize the severity of the situation. Uh, but on that though, how willing do you think? How long do you think? How far do you think Trump is prepared to go to put an end to this thing? Because let's say he goes in, just takes what remains of American missiles and just carpet bomb what they can of Iran, but they can't achieve what they want. Uh, is it just pulling back then and going home? I mean, do you think it's possible for the U.S. to leave the Middle East without having the Strait of Hormuz open? Because this seems so critical. If the Iranians can hold the Strait of Hormuz, we've already seen more or less what they can do to dismantle the U.S. presence in the Middle East. They can, collect their, you said the toll, but yeah, that would be reparations as well. They would be able to, I think the UAE already said that they might start to sell some of their oil in Chinese yuan, or they're open to it. There could be efforts to pressure these countries to scale back the presence of these U.S. military bases in the region, something that I'm sure some of them are already discussing, if that invites conflict instead of bringing security. So it seems like a massive cost for the U.S. to leave without the Strait of Hormuz being open. But again, if it can't be achieved, what do you do? Do you think it's possible for the U.S. just to leave? I know Joe Kent advocated for this, but is it possible?
Well, there's a difference between the United States leaving with the strait closed or open versus the United States leaving with Iran in control and with a toll booth on the road or in the strait. I think that Iran is going to end up controlling the strait, and it's going to have a toll booth in the strait. Uh, I think it's linked to the business in good part of reparations and sanctions. I think that it's hard to imagine the United States and Israel, certainly Israel, but the United States even paying reparations to Iran for all the damage it's done. And in terms of sanctions relief, it's going to be almost impossible to get the American sanctions off of Iran because that would have to go through Congress. And Congress is anti-Iran in the extreme. They may get the international sanctions off. But given the problem that we're going to face with sanctions relief for the Iranians, and given that we're not going to pay meaningful reparations, they're going to want to keep the toll booth in place for a long, long time. And furthermore, they're going to want to control the strait just because it provides them with huge amounts of coercive leverage. Anytime the United States or Israel in the future start to play tough or threaten to play tough with Iran, I think the Iranians will just remind the United States and Israel that they control the strait, and they will shut things down once again. That's a powerful deterrent. So I think no matter what, Iran's going to end up with control of the strait in a very obvious way, and they're going to end up with a toll booth in the middle of that strait. And it may be that boats or ships traversing that strait, or they're going through that toll booth, will have to pay in yuan. Who knows on that count? But so I think that's a given. But the discussion or the question that you raise gets at the fact that we're at a very plastic moment here. And what I mean by that is that there are just so many different issues on the table, and how they're all resolved, how they all fit together is just very hard to say. If you ask me, sort of, where is this train headed? What does this all mean for the U.S. military presence in the Gulf? And that was one of the questions that you were pushing forward. I don't have a clear answer. I'd be curious to know what you think, but do you think we're going to go back to the naval base at Bahrain? Do you think we're going to go back to any of those bases in the Middle East that have been either destroyed or badly damaged? Do you think that the Gulf states that hosted those bases are going to want us back? And what about the negotiations? How do the bases play in the negotiations?